Okay, so yeah, we've got more content tonight, so I'll try and keep this on track as much as possible. But I do want to sort of share with you what my first impressions of Scala were back in the day. I was coming from a long time programming Java. Java, okay language, but the tooling for Java was pretty magnificent, right? IDEs like IntelliJ would practically write the code for you. As you started typing things, you'd hit dot, and up would come a bunch of things, and you'd be like, oh, I want that one, and it would tell you exactly what to fill in. So I got interested in Scala, and I started trying to learn this new language. And the first thing I realized was that I wasn't going to be able to lean on the tools in order to learn it. And that's not a bad thing. You do learn a language differently if you learn it, you know, kind of the hard way. But I really did miss having things, you know, simple things like code completion and stuff like that. So I started looking around at the time. There were a couple of different options, and the main ones that were available were Ensime, something called Ensime, which was the enhanced Scala intelligence mode for Emacs, which I got working after a weekend of struggling. I got it working one time, and I'm like, this is great. I can see pop-ups, and I can see code completion. And then something went wrong, and I never got it working again after that. I never did figure out what it was. So then I started trying to use the plugin for Eclipse at the time, and that worked. Except I was on a plane one time, and I was doing some Scala. Suddenly, everything turned red, and I mean everything. Like the whole file turned red. And nothing would compile anymore, so I thought, right, I'll quit Eclipse. I quit Eclipse, and that Eclipse never started again. I kid you not. I had to wipe it out, take it down to empty, yeah, it was pretty close, down to the metal. Almost had to reinstall the operating system. So it was rough, and all I can say is, you know, this was a good long time ago now, nearly 10 years, long time ago. Things have improved greatly, and we're very lucky now. We have a number of great tools. Scala IDE, which is the Eclipse. It's not really Eclipse on its own anymore. It's like a packaged IDE ready to go. NetBeans, I haven't checked in on NetBeans for a while, but NetBeans really pushed, during the early days, really upped the ante. It was one of those ones that kind of nudged things forward. There was, I forget who it was, but there was one guy on there, he was absolutely trying to make a really good environment. And IntelliJ got on it, and their support became very good. And in fact, I'm going to say right now, we do training in Scala, and we still recommend everybody install IntelliJ for their training. I don't want them learning the tool while they're trying to learn the language. The tool should be as simple to use as possible, get out of the way. That said, I came back to Ensime probably about 2.5, maybe 3 years ago, and I remember it must have been about 2 years ago, because I was actually had one of the first conversations while I was still working at TypeSafe briefly, and I was at Scala Exchange, and at the time I saw that Sam Halliday and another guy, Rory Graves, had sort of kicked off, and they're like, hey, anybody remember Ensime? We're doing that again. And I'm like, very interesting, because we've got this thing called Activator, and I was like, I wonder if we can plug in Ensime in some way to get Activator to give code completion, because that would be a great first experience for people. Anyway, long story short, had a nice hallway conversation with them, got dragged in. I think it went something along the lines of, Rory said, hey, Ensime on Sublime doesn't work, but I know you're a Sublime user. If I can get it working, will you get involved with the project? And I'm like, sure, he's never going to get it working. And about 3 weeks later, he comes back and he says, hey, it's working. So I'm like, great, now I've got to do this. Anyway, truth is, I've had a blast doing it, and really still am very much enjoying it. So Ensime is now no longer the enhanced Scala intelligence mode for Emacs. It's now the enhanced Scala intelligence mode for editors. Okay, we actually have multiple editor support, and there's a list of them. Choose your favorite. Here are the supported ones that we know of, or that have some level of involvement right now. So we've got Emacs, of course. Emacs is the granddaddy. It has almost everything. New features coming, because, well, I'll get into the Graphpocalypse a bit later on, but it has all of the features that are available up until this point, including Java editing support. The others, we've got Atom. Any Atom users here? Yep. I like Atom too. One of the main problems I've got is I'm a dyed-in-the-wool Linux user. I won't at this point. I'm too stuck in my ways on Linux. And high DPI support in Atom doesn't really work quite right yet. I get menus that come up with font sizes that have they're so big they have 3 letters. And how you get bigger rather than smaller from high DPI, I don't know. What's going on with that? But they come out like these crazy big Duplo letters, and you can't use the menus. So that's killed that for me. I'm a long-time Vim user. I still reach for Vim a lot, but usually from the command line. Visual Studio Code, I think it's called. You guys know about this? It's sort of Microsoft released this, I guess it's kind of a stripped-down version of Visual Studio. It's actually quite interesting. I've tried it. Works nicely. It has some support for Ensime, and it's picking up script. It's picking up speed.
Community edition.
Yes, it's a free community edition editor, and then of course there's Sublime, singled out in this list as the only proprietary offering, but I love it and I use it and I find it very easy to get along with. The back-end language is Python, which was actually the same as Vim, which was my previous favorite programming language back in the days when I was a Java developer and I was paid to be a Java developer. I used to love working in Python. And then I discovered Scala and I'm like, ooh, this is nice. I get a little bit of all of this stuff. But still love Python, and the fact that I can edit and work on it in Python is a big draw for me. So let's go through this. This is my extremely professional slide deck that I'll be working through. Actually, I follow the Venkat Subranium mode of presentation, which is just list a bunch of stuff and say, I've done that, I've done that, I've done that. Right, getting started with it. Okay, so you need an editor and you need a build tool. What Ensime is a server that runs, you start it up, it gets running in the background, and then your client sends in requests over a few different protocols right now. It's probably time to dig into those. There are 2 protocols that are kind of legacy. One of them is called Swank, and that is based on S expressions in Lisp. Remember, it came from Emacs, so they're Lisp it's like a very compact JSON with lots of colons and parens in it. That's probably a good way to describe it. So that's Swank. There's also Jerk, which is unfortunately named, but that's the JSON protocol. And now we have the new stuff that's coming in, which isn't supported in many of the editors yet, called Swanky and Jerky, and they're based on they're mostly the same protocol, but using WebSockets to get the communication back and forth. Converting Sublime over is going to be a big job for that. So if anybody here, and in particular my Python skills are about 10 years out of date, because lo and behold, that was about the time I discovered Scala and stopped doing so much Python. Never really did a lot of JSON in Python. So we've got a big task ahead in taking the Swank protocol, which is basically deprecated now. 1.0 of Ensime just came out. Swank is not going to be supported going forward. So if we want the new features, this is kind of the carrot and the stick that Sam's holding over us right now. We have to get it up to one of the new protocols in order to get the new stuff. And so that's going to be a bit of work. So I'm fishing for volunteers here if anybody wants to get involved. In particular, if you know Python, JSON, and any unit testing framework that you're happy to work in, that's what we really need, is we need a bunch of JSON work and a bunch of unit tests to make sure they work correctly. It may be quite easy. I'm cautiously optimistic that it's actually quite easy to take the S expressions, just write a different serializer and drop it in and everything will magically work. Life is rarely that kind, but anyway, yes, so getting started, you need an editor, you need a build tool that are supported. The build tools are also, everything's organized around Ensime. .org. Build tools, you've got your SBT, which is what I use, your CBT, which I have only just recently started hearing about, Pants, which is the Twitter tool, Maven, of course, the granddaddy of them all, Line, another one I'm not really familiar with, Gradle, and then you can actually edit the Ensime files manually if you want to. The way it works is from your project, you get a .ensime file, which is basically a bunch of settings that tell you all the class path and everything it needs to know to be able to fire up an Ensime server. Once it's running, you communicate through one of the protocols from the client side. And the support from the build tool is largely push this .ensime file out there and manage the server process coming up, maybe do a few debugging things. In the case of Sublime, if I show you the supported text editors, you'll see that in the list, SBT integration is down the bottom here. Ensime will command SBT for you and do all the work. In pretty much all the other editors, there's an SBT plugin already, and the two work so well that it's not really been together. It's not really been a high priority to put that functionality into one. Basically, as soon as I start Ensime, I start SBT running server mode as well, and the two are running alongside each other. They don't fight. They get on pretty well. They behave well. It is time to mention one thing about this, though. You may be under the impression that running Ensime in an editor is going to be this wonderfully lightweight experience. By the time you're running the editor and Ensime and SBT in server mode, it's about as heavy as running IntelliJ. You don't actually save a lot on resources. It gets pretty gnarly in there. But yeah, that's not the reason. That's not the reason to come to it. If you just want lightweight editing, don't start Ensime. Just use the text editor. Right. So let's see. Getting help is the other thing that I need to mention. This has become quite amusing in the Gitter channels. We have very active Gitter channels. We have a very nice team of people who occasionally get other people weighed in. I want to set expectations here. Ensime's great. I use it all the time. It is my primary development tool at this point. It is a long way from perfect, and it breaks a fair amount. It hasn't eaten my code in a fair while, but I'm not going to promise that it isn't going to do that. Keep your code nice and safe in GitHub. Okay, usually Control-Z will bring back anything disastrous that it does. But it's, you need to be aware it's not going to be a super smooth experience. If you want a super smooth experience at this point, you're still better off going with an IntelliJ or a Scala IDE. However, if you want something that you can actually really get involved with, customize, make better, and you're already well familiar with Scala, I think it would be a mistake as a beginner to come into this and try and learn Scala and Ensime at the same time. That's a lot of cognitive load right there. But if you're comfortable with it, then there are some real advantages. One of the things we do get occasionally is people will be having a bad day. They'll wade in to the Gitter channel, swinging. They'll come in and they're like, it's all broken. Nothing works. Everything went wrong. To which Sam usually says, have you read the troubleshooting guide? And everybody comes back and immediately says, yes, I've read the troubleshooting guide. It became such a common question, we now have a bot that says, as soon as error or compiler or any of these keywords come up, it says, have you read the troubleshooting guide? And gives you a nice little link to it. I've actually started this new game of bot bingo, as I call it, which is trying to say something completely innocuous and unrelated to Ensime in any way, and still get it to go and tell me to read the troubleshooting guide. Sometimes it's a nice distraction from work. So yeah, please do remember everyone's a volunteer, everybody's got day jobs, and it's actually it's a good group of people. Things break quite a lot. It's got some good project velocity, which means that there's a lot of changes coming in a lot of the time. Sometimes you just need to read what's changed. If you go in, I'm the worst offender at this, being me. I naturally go in and say, hey, something's broken, what happened? And they'll say, didn't you read the README? I'm like, no, I didn't read the README. I've got you guys to talk to. And they say, oh yeah, we changed the commands around or something like that. Yeah, so anyway, what it is, it's fast and usable integration of Scala into several editors, perhaps the one you like the best, and if it's not, there's plenty of examples out there now in different languages so that you can add yours, if you are so inclined. Many features can be explored on it. It's not feature rich in the way that IDEA is feature rich, but the main ones are covered. You got your I'll show you. I'll run through them. We'll have a good explore of them. It's very customizable. I think that's the main thing, in my opinion, is I can change this. I don't like something, I can just go straight in and change it. Sublime, this is one of the reasons I like Sublime, is it's very configurable. I find it hard to find a lot of the settings in IDEA because there are just so many of them. Trying to change things like the white space and stuff like that. It's written by you. If you want to change something, you can. It's really not that hard. I mean, the Ensime plugin is maybe a couple of thousand lines of Python code. It's really quite small. It's a very nice environment to work in because it's, I'm a Scala guy. I like statically compiled language or statically typed languages, but sometimes it's nice when you're working on the editor to just hit save and it's immediately running in the editor. There's no break. I was working in a cafe around the corner, fixing the JavaDoc stuff on the way here, and I was like, try this, save, try and run it, didn't work. Try this, save, try and run it, works. So there's the very quick cycle time. I think the last one is probably the reason that a lot of how do I put, more seasoned Scala developers are starting to get to it. And this is a problem if you've used IntelliJ with any kind of what I would call type foolery. You'll probably have seen this. IntelliJ doesn't really use the Scala compiler. They have their own implementation that's mostly the same, and they're tracking it well, and they respond to, error reports quickly and stuff like that. But you get deep enough in some monad shit with some for comprehensions, and suddenly your for comprehension is going to turn red, and it's going to turn red on valid code. Okay, it happens quite a lot. It leads to the syndrome of, people get tired of me saying it at work. I'm like, hit compile. They're like, what's wrong with this code? Hit compile, and it compiles, and they're like, but it's all red, and I'm like, yeah, life sucks. So you get less of that. I won't say it's perfect, and in fact, Ensime does have its own quirks. It suffers from dirty builds occasionally, but if you rebuild everything with SBT, it usually clears up nicely. And you get fewer of these false positives and negatives than you do in IDEA because it's using the presentation compiler. So there we go, that's all of those. What it isn't, it is not complete, not even close. Find usages is probably my biggest missing piece right now. I can usually get around it. I mean, if you know your editor well enough, you can figure out a find, a search in the directory that will usually get you where you need to go or something like that. But it's coming because of the Graphpocalypse. Maybe it's time to talk about that. Sam's been talking about this thing called the Graphpocalypse for ages. The problem is that Ensime doesn't really maintain a connected graph of all of the calls in the system while it's running, at least not yet, which means that you can forward track easily enough. That's a pretty solvable problem. Backtracking, finding all of the places where something that's going to be refactored are used, they don't work fully yet. You can see this later on. I'll show you the rename. The rename sort of does half a job. Whatever's loaded in and it knows about, it'll rename. The other things it just doesn't rename, and when you try and compile, you're like, oh, I didn't rename that. Okay, I'll have to go and do that myself. The Graphpocalypse is an attempt to build up all of that information and get it to give that kind of functionality. It's these functions that are at the bottom here. Find usages, show implementations, advanced type search, passive suggestions, and white box macros. These are coming soon, and that's because we got a Google Summer of Code intern to abuse. And he, I think it is a he, is hard at work on it. So that's very exciting. It'll be a while before these features are stable. So don't dive in thinking you're going to be able to do find usages that quickly, but they're coming, and that's exciting to me. All right, so it's not complete. It isn't totally reliable. I'd say I probably restart Ensime 2 or 3 times a day, but I'm okay with that. It's pretty quick to restart, and I know as soon as it starts malfunctioning, I'd like it to be more reliable, but actually it's got to the point now, I was talking outside, it's got to the point now where it's reliable enough that it probably ought to be less reliable because it would prompt me to do something more about it. It's actually working well enough as a primary tool right now that a lot of the time, unless I get time to mess with it, I'm like, oh, it's just good enough. Let's just plow through and keep going. I've got to get my work done. It's not as full-featured as IDEA, I think I've mentioned that, and it isn't, I mentioned this, it's not necessarily lighter on resources. As I say, by the time you've had Ensime running for a few hours and you've had SBT running for a few hours, you're going to be using that 16 gigs of RAM on your laptop, and you probably want to think about investing in another 16. Scala's a heavy language. I'm quite happy to pay for a bit more memory to get the, get the compiler doing what I want it to do. So, all right, Sublime. I'm not going to spend a whole bunch of time on. It just happens to be my editor, the one that I like to use. How do you get this then? Well, let's take a look here. This is Sublime running. The first thing you'll do, and this is true for most of these editors have some kind of package management. In Sublime, there's actually something called the package manager, and the way you get it is it's kind of weird. It really ought to come as part of the editor install. But what you actually have to do is bring up what's known as the console, which is this guy. You'll get used to seeing the console a lot if you actually start working in Ensime, because it's where the logs, it's where the trouble shows up. So you keep that open a lot of the time. You sneak a quick peek. Fortunately, there's a very quick shortcut to get it up and down again. And what you do is you paste a command in there that's off the web, and it installs the package manager for you. Once you've got the package manager, you can just simply hit Control-Shift-P, which is the do everything in this editor key binding, and you say install package on package control, and it thinks about it down the bottom here, and then it comes up and it says here's all the things that you can do, and we can have a look in here, and I think Ensime won't be in the list right now because I've already got it installed, but something like alignment, aligner, yeah, there's all the different packages. Ensime will be in the list, you install it. That's part one. The next thing you need is the support in the build tool. So you go to supported build tools, and you click on SBT, and it shows you how to get set up using it. You add the SBT plugin, which is the thing that builds your .ensime file for you. Probably put it globally, because you don't want to keep adding it to every project as you go. And here's your commands. So at this point, you've got the plugin installed for both the build tool and the editor. You're actually ready to go. The last thing you need is a project to work on. And a project, if you're using SBT, is going to have an SBT build file. So what you do in there is you say SBT Ensime config. Let's do that. So here's my test project, SBT Ensime config. I'm going to close my editor down, and we'll go through the whole thing. So run the Ensime config. Takes a few seconds. This is effectively what happens in IntelliJ when you import the project. It goes through, it figures out, it didn't actually have to do a lot, but it goes through and figures out all the dependencies it needs. It downloads the sources and the Scala docs and the Java docs, makes them available, sticks together your class path, all that sort of thing. And if you want to have a look at it, it's sort of semi-human readable. This is what you get. Okay, this is the Ensime, and this is what we mean when we say manual. You could produce that yourself if you wanted to. It's probably easier to get somebody else to do it, but yeah, you could write that yourself. It's not beyond the realms of reality. Anyway, so once you got that, start the editor up.
Quick question.
Yeah.
It looked like closure. It's got keywords.
I think it's probably S expressions, actually. Remember, this is an Emacs.
Right.
Yeah, it is. There's the telltale paren at the top. It's Lisp. It's Lispy. There, more parens. It's actually very light on parens for Lisp. That's what threw you. Like the end of the file was not, half of the end of the file was not closing parens. That's what Lisp usually looks like. So, all right, so that's that. So we've started it up. You open up the project, which I have open here. Just open up the folder, and then you go in. You usually start up the console when you start this, just so you can see what's going on. And then you say Control-Shift-P, run all commands that it knows about. Ensime startup. Okay, and the first time you do this, this particular operation takes longer than it does on subsequent runs until you rebuild. Now, if you change your dependencies or there's various other reasons, there's pretty extensive logging right now. So one of the things that you'll find is the log files get very big and tend to slow things down. So, you know, once every few days, I just blow away my .ensime file and recreate it. It's simple enough to do. If you delete the Ensime file in the Ensime cache and all of the other Ensime things, you kind of do a reset. I'll run through that before the end. It's in the list of turning it off and on again kind of level of getting things working properly. Okay, now it's running. So if we go back into here, the next thing, as I mentioned, that I always do is just start SBT running at the same time. Pretty much Ensime startup, SBT startup. These two things work together. At some point, I'll add the SBT, or somebody, if they get there before me, will add the SBT support into Ensime, so we won't have to run both of them. It'll just be the one running. But so that's running. I've got a bunch of keyboard shortcuts set up, so I'll compile this. And let's see what Ensime gives us. So first thing you'll see is I can do things like this. Hold down Alt and click on something. And you get code. You get a tooltip that tells you the type. Not only the type, but in this case, the call. So here it says this is a person. That's a person type. Here, what it's actually telling me is the signature of the apply method for it. And that takes a string and another string and an int and returns a person. I can then click on these. They're hot linked. I did this. See? This is why I love this stuff, because I did this. That takes you to the definition of string. That's all right, save your applause. There's much more impressive than that to come. So anyway, yeah, that gives you something there. If you go to something like down here, I've got zip. We can see one of the more scary ones, and we can click through to can build from if we want to, that sort of thing. And I have to do that because I noticed earlier on Adrian. I'm like, hey, Adrian's going to be there. I'll take the chance to embarrass him. So anyway, that works.
That's why I usually show.
Right, what else have we got? Let's go through. Let's follow my script so I don't forget anything. So that's tooltips. Tooltips are good. All right, alt-click. Error highlighting. Let's go back over here and we'll do something bad. Let's say zippy and save. Ta-da! Error highlighting. As soon as I hit save, it tells me, hey, you've got a problem there. What I can do is click on that, first of all. Watch down the bottom here. This is a bit subtle until you're used to it. The status bar is right down the bottom here. But if I click on this, it'll tell me Zippy is not a member of list of int. Okay, that's not all that helpful. So there's fortunately another option here, which is Ensime notes. And this is for the what I usually do here is choose a layout that lets me have both of these at the same time. Move the notes down the bottom here. This is what's wrong in the current file. So right there it says zippy's not that. If I change reverse it to reversed it, then we get two notes down the bottom here that tell you what's wrong with it. So I can fix those, go back and make it work, make it right again, save, and some other nice things, and maybe we'll see this later. It's not only errors, warnings get highlighted. It's kind of interesting. It has a different set of warnings, and in many cases I like the warnings better than IDEA has, but it's also missing some really good ones. But it would be lovely to have more of the kind of hints that IntelliJ has. But this one picks up a bunch of things that IntelliJ doesn't as well. So it's quite interesting working in a mixed project environment where other people say, hey, you should be using, what was the one the other day that I forgot about? You should use length on arrays rather than size, because size causes a wrapping event to happen, whereas length is just called on the underlying array. And IntelliJ, sorry?
Is that the other way around?
No, I think length is the one on arrays that exists there. Size is on collection, so it has to do the wrapped array thing to get to size. And it's also true for strings, length, string.length. And IntelliJ picked that up, this doesn't. So I'm thinking, oh, that's going to be on my list of things. Yes, abide. Actually, abide support. Did I just hear you volunteer to put abide into Ensime? Because that would be a lovely thing to have in Ensime, abide support. Anyway, so that it's quite nice. It's got a lot of that stuff. Another thing that it shows is when a test fails. When this is actually the SBT plugin. When a test fails, it highlights the line that failed, which is surprisingly a nice feature to have. Makes it very quick to see exactly what happened. Right. So that's that feature. We've got auto import. God, I can't tell you, it wasn't working when I first got to this. The feature was there, but it just didn't work. And it was the first feature that I dug into and fixed. Until you haven't had auto import, you don't realize how freaking essential it is. It is it's an extremely lengthy process to go and find every import you need because something's not compiling and enter it manually. It's very tedious. So, yep, so we can do that. Let's add a val f equals future of 1. Okay, that's now an error, not found value future. Control-Alt-I, there it is, Scala concurrent future, and it adds it at the top. Lovely. We'll take some of that. Now, however, we need an implicit context. If I save this, we should get it. This is a little bit rougher, but it's still not too bad. You can just go down here and did it put the import in? I can't remember. Yes, it did. Yes, compiler's very helpful. And hooray, we've got it working again. So nice. See, this is what it's like. Not super slick, but serviceable. Works well. In practice, the features come together nicely. All right, so that's auto import. Import organization, another one. Once you start importing a few of these things, you can just hit Control-Alt-O and it reorganizes them. It didn't do much here, but that will also remove the unnecessary imports. This is something that does better than IDEA. IDEA will often show you something is unused when you've imported implicits, and they are actually used. You remove them and it won't compile anymore. Ensime doesn't do that. It's like, nope, that's actually in use, or no, that's really not in use.
How well does it work with path dependent types? Like importing something from an object?
Doesn't. It does sort of half a job. What it does there often is it sticks $1 in the middle, and you have to go back and change it to a dot. So it's yeah. So it's sort of it's one of those things. It's not super slick, but it's workable. So yeah, that's a good question. All right. So Ensime notes I've shown you. Code completion wouldn't be much of an IDE without code completion. So let's choose something like a string hello dots and control space, and it didn't work. Let's start typing. There we go. Yeah, no, that's not right. But reverse is there. Where did it get return from? Okay.
Let's do it and control click and see where it goes.
Good plan. Yeah, no, that's not really there. No. But reverse is on there, which is the one I wanted. So I'm not quite sure where that happened. Now, reverse is an implicit. So it's not just methods that are available on the object, it is picking up the implicits too. I didn't even realize this until I was putting this talk together, but Ensime has support for implicits that we don't have in Sublime right now, but it will actually tell you all of the implicits and all of the details about them, let you put a little blue underline under them or whatever you want to do, and give contextual information like the class that's being brought in from. So once I saw that, I'm like, that's pretty much at the top of my wish list of features that I want to add next. Now that I know it's there. No, that one's just for implicits, just highlighting the implicits. But basically, what Sam and Rory said to me was, if you can get that to work in Sublime, and that's a big question. The Sublime documentation isn't wonderful, and I don't yet really know how to inject this stuff into the syntax coloring and change the styling. If I can do that, then I've cracked the nut for semantic highlighting as well, because basically it's the same sort of thing. It comes back with a bunch of contextual information, and then you go through and it comes back with the contextual information and the start and stop points. And so basically you just need to run through the editor view and change the styles based on the semantics that are returned. So that's going to be a weekend that I need to set aside, and like I'm going to dig into this weekend and try and figure out how the styles work and that sort of thing. So that's code completion. What else have we got? I hear you say. We've got control-click navigation. So if I'm in here and I say, oh, look, a print writer, control-click, and it takes me to the print writer. Very nice. So that works pretty well. And the other one I want to show you is, and I just actually got this working for the Java side in the cafe around the corner a few minutes ago. So here's the Scala one, Ensime, browse Scala doc at point. Okay, go to my browser, and it didn't happen. Did it happen in the other window? Nope. Ah, lovely. Let's see what this said. It went, which one did I do? No, that's this one. Okay, let's try again. Development, browse Scala doc at point. Okay, that happened. Let's go back up here. Yes, there we go. I don't know if you saw that, but it actually highlighted the zip for a moment there as well. It's fancy. So, yeah, thank you. See, I told you, spontaneous applause was bound to happen eventually. This also works for Java. So if I come down here and say Ensime, browse, it says Scala doc. Maybe I need to change that to doc at point. But this now takes you to, it's not nearly as fancy, but it takes you to the close method in the Java doc as well. So that didn't work until half an hour ago or an hour ago or something. And it was a one-line change in Python. It was a one-line change that took me about 10 different tries to get working. But it was very quick. Yeah, and it's hacky. It's a long story. Right. All right, so that's that. Refactorings. We have a few. All but one of them work really well. So let's do one. Inline def, first of all. Actually, let's do it the other way around. Let's take this constants in the code, or string definitions in the code. That'll never wash for code reviews. So let's do a extract local, and we'll call this. It's down the bottom here. We just need to get used to that. That's where Sublime puts its dialog. So it's asking me for the extracted val name, and I'll say file name, and ta-da! File name gets inserted and gets used here. The same for the extension. Let's do that. So extract local, extension, and it worked again. Hooray! It does some funky selection afterwards. That's another one I have to track down. Why it ends up like selecting that afterwards seems very, very random. I think what I'll do is just remove all selections after something like that happens, because it's less confusing than having something randomly selected. And we can also inline these things. So if I come back here and I then say Ensime inline local, it totally did something different than I expected, which is why Control-Z is a good thing. I wonder if it's this one I have to do. Let's try that. Inline local. No, that didn't do anything at all. All right, I swear that was working the other day, so something's gone funky there.
You inline the 10th file, that's what it is.
The previous time, yeah.
Oh, that's kind of what you want it to do, but what I really wanted it to do, maybe I have to select this. No, it just did it. Okay, that was just high latency in the server. I told them this was happening, and Sam's like, no, it's working fast. And I'm like, I don't know, man, it's taken like 20 seconds on some of these operations. And he's like, no. Now I think I have video proof, so yeah.
Just submit this talk as a bug.
Oh, they love when I do that. They're like, yeah. So anyway, it did happen, just very, very slowly. That works. What's the other ones we've got? And we've got extract method. So this should be interesting. Let's try this one. let's take this whole thing and do an extract method. Extract method, and we'll call it write the file. Look at that, it worked. Again, it left a kind of, I've got to figure out the selection, but it did. It created the private def. It does have a habit of fully qualifying path names, which it really doesn't need to do in that case. It doesn't need to be Java.io file. I've got that imported at the top. But otherwise, did a pretty bang-up job, and it did it nice and quick. So that replaced write the file there. It even remembered to leave the val there. Yeah.
Is this using Scala Refactoring, or is it getting something from it down?
This is, so what happens here is the request goes in with a position in the editor. I'm glad you asked. It goes in with a position in the editor, and often if you select like a word, it provides as much of that contextual information as possible. It sends that through to Ensime. Ensime figures out what needs to be done and sends back a patch file, and the patch file is then applied to the file. That's the way it works now.
The way Ensime figures out, does it use Scala Refactoring factor, or they have their own refactoring?
That's a good question. I don't know. It's using whatever Scala IDE is using. I should pay kudos to the Scala IDE team, because Ensime wouldn't be in the state it's in without a lot of the work that they've done as well. So Scala IDE has been instrumental in the rebirth of Ensime as well.
And that's using Scala Refactoring.
It is using Scala Refactoring, okay. So what I can tell you is that what we get back is a patch file, which is a big improvement. What it used to do was just go and overwrite the file, which was terrifying. Because if things went wrong, often it wouldn't undo afterwards and things as well. Which is why I say it hasn't eaten my code for quite a while now, because the patches, that's something that the editor does, and it's a much better way of working. So, okay, so that's good. Let's see what else we've got. Wrong one. Rename. Okay, rename is the one that I told you about. Will end up often doing just half the job. So if I come in here and I say write the file, and we'll change the file name to Ensime refactor, where is it? Refactor rename. And I'll change it to file prefix. So it works beautifully in a local file, and it works reasonably well if you've already opened a bunch of the files that you're working on, and it happens to have those in the cache at any given time. Anything that it hasn't cached, it just won't do it, and then you'll hit compile, and like half the job will be done and half the job won't be done. And that will improve with the Graphpocalypse implementation. It will actually know to go and do that.
And inject some deviousness. Does it do named arguments? Like, what if you provide the name there, but write the file at the invocation?
Oh, that's a great question. I do not know. Let's find out, shall we?
Yeah, well,
so let's change it.
I still want to get back at you for earlier. So.
All right. So this would be reversed equals reversed, and this would be file name equals file name. Yeah, let's see what it does. Right. So let's do this one. Refactor rename, and we'll change it to file prefix. I expect applause, by the way, if this does actually do what it's. Look at that! Whoa! I really can't take any credit for that at all. I didn't even know that worked or it didn't work until Adrian asked. But somebody did it right. Cool. That's very nice. So yep, rename. But like I said, use that one with caution. And the last one is reformatting, which it isn't in the main one yet because I've only just, I put it in this branch. Let's mess these up a bit, do some things that look ugly. And then I can say Ensime development, reformat this file, and look at that, beautiful. It actually uses your, I think it's Scalariform still. But it uses your project settings and just does it right there. So that's nice. All right, enough refactorings. Let's talk about some of the other stuff. Debugging is probably the last thing to hit. Debugging is the area undergoing most development right now. It's actually it's both a good and a bad story at the moment. The good of it is it used to be fairly feature complete, and You know, all the features worked okay, but it was unreliable. It would just blow chunks occasionally and never really could understand why. A guy called Chip Sankbile, has been working on something called the Scala debugger, and Ensime actually has pretty good project velocity at this point, to the point where I'm mostly doing the Sublime stuff of it, and the server is adding features faster than I can support them in Sublime right now, so I'm not really helping them add the features there. But poor old Chip is working on Scala debugger on his own, so I'm sort of jumping in a little bit on that as I get a chance to. And the great news is the Scala debugger is like super reliable. It just works now. There's no blowing up or anything. But the downside is some of the features kind of regressed a little bit as that was brought in. So let me show you what it looks like right now, and you can decide whether it's time to jump in on debugging that. I actually use it for debugging now whenever I can. Up until a few weeks ago, I still jumped back into IDEA every time I needed to debug something, because it just had the features that I needed there. But it's getting better here, and the only way it's going to get much better is if I actually feel the pain and force myself to live in it. So that's kind of what I'm trying to do. So let's stick down a couple of breakpoints, breakpoint there and another one here. And then what you do is you go into SBT, which is running down here. You say debugging, which turns on the debugging support. Basically what that does is it has some settings. Came up down the bottom here. It has some settings to monitor the right port and wait for a debugger to attach on startup. So now if I say run, what it does is it says waiting for the debugger to attach. And I have it connected to F5, so I just hit F5, and that did something weird. Maybe I don't have it set up for F5 on here. Let's just do this instead. Debugging, start debugger. There we go. So now we hit a breakpoint, and we can come in here, and it actually works. So this part works well. Single step doesn't work at the moment, so I can put another breakpoint down and flip to that. I meant to look into single step after the last of these talks that I did a couple of weeks ago, and I just haven't had time since then. But I can let it run on to this next one. We have watches, so we can see the state of the variables. I can double click on some of these to expand them. It'd be nice to have like a triangle. Actually, it does have a triangle. Look at that. I never noticed that before. That one has a triangle, and these don't. Wow, there's a feature I accidentally found. What it doesn't have right now is pretty toStrings on a lot of the stuff. This is one of the regressions. The old debugger would actually say X is an instance of list with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 in it. I can get that, but it's fairly tortured right now. So what I have to do, particularly in the case of a list, you really get to see the pain involved. So you have to go to head, and then you have to go into head, and you have to find the value of head. And then you go to tail, and you open tail, and the tail will have a head, and then you look in the head, and you get the next one, and so on and so forth. So it's a bit painful. And the toString, I actually have an implementation in the debugger of toString, but I haven't built it up and got it supported in here yet. So there's work to be done on that. But as I say, it does actually work quite nicely from a reliable. The features that are there work great. It needs some more features adding. And probably one of the ones that's really high on my list is it will show you the watches for variables that are in scope. There's no way to add a custom watch or a custom expression to evaluate right now. And I use that a lot, so that's really getting high on my list of pain from using this. All right, so that's debugging. That's probably about all the features I really need to go into for now. I should be able to let this continue. Oh yeah, it's counting down, and there we go, and it finished. And if you want to go back to non-debugging mode, you just say debugging off. And I don't know, somehow that F5 turned on red squigglies in my. I think it's doing a spell check.
You have to get the computer.
I swear it was F5, but somehow that's now doing spell checks in there rather than the keys that I expected. This is, who wants a boring life where everything is explained and completely predictable? I like a bit of excitement. All right, so missing features. Find usages is coming. Class path search is something that I want to add in Sublime, but it's already there in Emacs version. The other thing, though, is that I think this is part of the bigger offering here. Ensime, what I've shown you is all the features in Ensime. What I haven't shown you is a bunch of stuff that the other plugins in Sublime do that make life really, really wonderful. One of my favorites, it has the mother of all aligners. So if I do something like X's match, and then case, head, cons to, cons tail, and then do another one here, case, head, nil, or something like that. And this sort of thing, I can do all sorts of magic in here. The align by lets me do all sorts of things. The fat arrow is the, that I actually added that one because that's one that I'm going to use a lot. Aligns it by fat arrow. You can do by spaces, or you can even enter a regex. You can put any regex you like in there and it'll align it. Do you know how many times I've dreamed of that feature in other IDEs? It's fantastic. So, and it remembers the last regex you typed in as well. So when you're on a prettification spree, you only have to enter it one time and then you just go select loads of code and align it all. It's great. Yeah, there you go. Now, what else do you need? Another thing is this. Yeah, this is not. I don't think this is compiling. If I make it now, yep. Oh, it's a warning. But it's still a warning though. So it's a warning. It says it would fail on the following input. Incomplete match. This is. I think you can see it up the top there. This is a list of compiler errors and warnings in the code right now, and it takes me straight there. That's SBT doing that. That's not Ensime, but it will take you to any of the failures in the code. So, bunch of stuff that you get in there. I've got a bunch of Git integration, Git gutter. I can connect up to GitHub and look at the issues for this particular project that I'm on. Compare this. I don't think this is in a branch, so I can't really show you any of the Git comparison stuff, but you get the idea. Lots and lots of different plugins that make for good stuff, and I can probably show you some of the ones that I've got. Let's remove packages, and then we'll see what I've got. The color ones give you all the different colors. Load file to REPL. I use that a lot in demos. It's got markdown support. The sidebar enhancements are really nice. That's probably another thing I should show. Although you don't really have the intelligence to say create a new class, it is very easy, for example, to just say new file, and we'll call it new thing.scala, and it creates it right there, and you can start programming it. I've got snippets. I love the snippets. I work for a company called SIBO right now. We have the continuum package that I'm working on. I get tired of typing that at the top of everything, so that's what I'm working in. I get that. I can also do the C imports, and that brings in the 3 imports that I'm working with mostly, that sort of thing. So very customizable, and the snippets can do fields in them and fill in multiple fields at the same time and do things like you can work all sorts of magic with them, so it's very nice. Anyway, I think I've probably talked long enough on that. Right, when it all goes wrong, these are the things to know. So this will happen if you're using it. You just need to know the reset operations. The first reset operation, the simplest one, the quickest one, is this. Ensime restart. That will take down the old server. We can see it happening over here shortly. There we go. Takes down the old server, kills it, restarts another one. That will fix 80% of the things that go wrong. Now, occasionally the server will have just a complete nervous breakdown and stop responding to anything sensible. When that happens, your best bet is to go, this is what I call the medium level reset. Quit the editor. This is a reason I don't keep a lot of other things running in Java. Kill all Java. Okay, there wasn't anything there, but often there will be a bunch of things running. Obviously, don't kill all Java if you've got IntelliJ running or something like that. But that'll take out your SBT, that'll take out your Ensime if they're misbehaving, and then you go back and start the editor up and start all over again. And finally, the nuclear option, when it all goes horribly wrong, is you quit, you kill all Java again, and you do rm-rf.ensime star, and then you say SBT or act Ensime config, and you have just nuked the entire thing and you're restarting from scratch. That'll clear everything out that Ensime knows about. If it doesn't work after that, go and have a look at the getting help section first, please. Otherwise you'll get teased. And if it still doesn't work, then I would recommend politely, I'm very good at polite and yet firm, going and saying, hey, who broke it? Who just checked something in? And invariably it'll be some conversation like, oh, Sam will say, oh yeah, I did something last night, but that shouldn't have affected that. And I'm like, I think it affected that. And then we'll do a bit of research, and often it will have affected that. So anyway, that's that. Anything else to say on it? Full project reset. Yeah. Okay, so the last part is sort of a recruiting drive. The first thing I'd say is recruiting users. For a long time, I used Ensime. My co-workers would see me using Ensime and Sublime, and they'd be like, this looks really cool. Remember that I know where the rough edges are, so I tend not to stray into the areas where you blow your own foot off and things like that. And they'd be like, I really want to run this. And they're like, can you help me get set up? And I would sit down and I would talk to them about the pain involved before I got involved, because I didn't want to become tech support to them while they were getting this going. I now think that it's got to the stage where, as long as you're willing to put up with a bit of resistance, it's time for people to come in and start messing with this. And in particular, if you've got the mindset of you are not afraid to take a look at it, try things out, try and make them better, try and narrow down. Usually, you're not going to get much response out of, hey, it broke, other than the bot saying, go and read the getting help section, and here's a link. If you say it broke and I have a 5-line program that shows it, here it is, that's going to get you a lot more attention. If you can put that in the form of a unit test that's failing, you're going to be very popular. If you can put it in a form of a unit test and fix the problem, you're immediately promoted to beer drinking buddy the next time the group gets together. So,
The bot will never harass you.
well, no, the bot will harass you anyway, but the bot harassing you is sort of a mark of acceptance as well. Like I say, I try and get the bot to harass me. I say things like, hey, Sam, my cat isn't compiling properly. And that's partly because I don't have a cat. And then the bot will say, read the getting help section, please. So it's funny. I like it. Right, so that's that. Documentation and setup are there, but always, there's never been a case when documentation and instruction couldn't be improved. So if you want to get involved with that, that's great. Finding and reporting bugs, coding, there's plenty of opportunities there. The predominant languages for the server is obviously written in Scala. The clients are all over the board. There's CoffeeScript, there's JavaScript, there's what is the one TypeScript? I think it is Visual Studio Code uses. Python. There's some Lisp. Whatever you want to get involved with, or you could even write your own editor in Elm or Pony or something, and get it going there. That would be interesting. If it's not to your tastes, if you try it and it's too much trouble, you're not going to get any fight out of me. If you decide that it's just not working for you, then there are plenty. It's not like the past when you have no other choice. You have plenty of choice now. This is the reason to use this is all the things I've laid out, because you want to, because it is actually really fast. One of the things that I haven't really impressed here, but it's actually irritating to me, is how much slower IntelliJ is when you go back into it after you've been using this for a while. I'm like, wow, I can't believe some of the pauses you get, and they're really noticeable when you haven't had them for a while. And all of a sudden you're typing things and it's like half a second for a code completion to come up, and you're like, this is unbelievable. I've just wasted half a second of my life. So you really do notice a difference in that. But anyway, even if you try it and you think it sucks or you can't get it working, there's there's a fair percentage of people that are like, it's just not working on my machine. I actually, we did finally get Simon Ocean, right? How do you say his last name? That one. We got him finally working, but basically it took me pairing with him for about an hour one morning to get him into some kind of working state. Some people just have trouble getting the thing up and running in the first place. I'm not even sure what happened. We just did a kind of strip down, back to bare bones, build it all up, and it worked better the second time. So even if you have a bad first experience, just know that things are improving at quite a rate now. It's got good project velocity, and the improvements are coming pretty quickly. So keep checking in from time to time, even if it's a miserable experience the first time. Don't hold it against us forever, because it is getting better. And that's really all I have. I'm happy to answer any questions. And I think there's the Alexi was mentioning the office hours kind of idea now as well. So yeah, thank you.
Nick, I'll just ask you to repeat the questions for the video.
Yeah, sure. Okay. Yes.
I saw you were flashing the settings on the screen that had some setting for the garbage collection, and you just mentioned something about pause time. Do you know if IntelliJ is using the same kind of garbage collection setting as this? And is that possibly different?
So the question is about the settings for garbage collection. I think those were just the defaults. I wouldn't say that the pauses that I've seen in Ensime in particular I wouldn't put those down to garbage collection pauses. It's usually something much more fundamental. Like a lot of the time, I kind of glossed over it, but earlier on I hit the dot and then hit control space, and we didn't get code completion. What actually happened there was a timeout, and the timeout was probably caused because, long story short, there was some kind of dirty build. It had to do a full type check, and the client is set up to only wait a certain amount of time for answers. And if it doesn't get them in that amount of time, it just abandons that thing. So if I waited for a couple of seconds and hit control space again, it would probably come up. That stands to be improved, but there are some limitations there in the way that it interacts with Sublime, and in particular the async mode of Sublime and what you can insert into the editor window asynchronously. But in all of those cases, I don't think it's garbage collection that's the holdup. It's actually having to do work like fully type check either the file or the entire project again, and that can take a few seconds. So, stuff like that is where the holdup is. I don't know what IntelliJ does. I do think probably some of those pauses there are likely to be some garbage collection, but I also think some of them are going to be the same sort of thing. It's suddenly got out of sync with its view of the code, and it has to do some fancy footwork to try and get it up to date again. And I think those are usually the holdups that you see. And they both have their moments. Another thing I think maybe you didn't notice, but the call to restart the server, at the moment that's a synchronous call and it takes several seconds. So when you actually restart the Ensime server, your editor will lock up for about 10 seconds while it goes through its little dance. It's not like you're going to do a lot in that time anyway, but it is kind of annoying that it just freezes everything for that time. And trying to get more and more of this stuff asynchronous is a big aim. Most of the calls are asynchronous at this point, but not all of them. So yeah, you're asking the wrong person on garbage collection though. I've spent many years in Java and I'm still not sure I could come up with the best garbage collection strategy on demand. I think you play with it until it works well enough and then you move on. So yeah, there was another, yeah.
You mentioned that it's very heavy, particularly with memory consumption. So just curious, most of this is coming from the Scala presentation compiler or from Ensime code itself? Yeah,
well, okay, so the question is about memory consumption. This is something we tell our students all the time. This is pretty much the way Scala is, right? The Scala compiler, no offense, the Scala compiler It's not the fastest compiler that I've ever worked with. It's a fairly slow compiler, and when you understand the amount of work it's doing, you can kind of understand that, particularly implicit resolution and traits, trait linearization, all those things are heavy to do. And so one of the, again, going back to the early painful days of Scala, I remember when Maven was the way you built stuff. And Maven would rebuild everything every time. It couldn't, because Scala breaks the convention of the file name to the class that's inside of it. Java has that convention of, the public class is named the same as the file that it's in. At least then tools could say, oh, you changed this file, or you changed this class, therefore I have to recompile this file. Maven didn't even have that option in Scala, so it rebuilt everything. It would take minutes and minutes to rebuild even small projects. And SBT came along and built on top of the fast Scala compiler and just aggressively cached everything that it could, so that it kept everything in memory and just recompiled the bits that it needed to. The idea being, we'll speed up compilation by doing it less, and we'll reuse whatever we can. And ever since then, I think the biggest trade-off in Scala compilation time is memory. The more memory you can throw at it, and the longer you can keep that server running, the faster it's going to go. It's going to have to do less work. And I think that carries on. Now, I'm getting some... Go on, give us the definitive answer.
I think a lot of the data structures are actually for your IDE.
Okay.
So the incremental compiler, there is some stuff that it needs to keep in memory and it does get a little bit big, but we're talking about, if you have 1 million lines of code, it gets to a gig or something like that.
Oh, okay.
So the incremental compiler is unlikely to really be the culprit here. I think, like you said, if you have SBT running, you have, Ensime, and it's, not yet graph up
Yeah.
with the thingy, and then, I'm sure there's a lot of memory there.
Yeah.
My logic has like 8 gigs, and it does fine in IntelliJ. But
Yeah.
I don't think it's a compiler, but I can see that there's a lot of data structures you would want to keep around in a resident version that, for the IDE that would do more.
Typically, I'm not using the memory for anything else when I'm programming, so I don't really care as long. And then you'll notice that I've got my little graphs up at the top here. This last one is swap. That's a pretty healthy swap right now. If that starts climbing, I restart my environment, because I'll instantly you'll see like the cliff of memory as it all falls away, and then you restart it and things are happy again for a long time. So I keep that running as well, because we deal with very large satellite files, and it's surprising how quickly, when you see that thing start ramping up with the big satellite files that I work on, you got about 20 seconds before the machine stops responding, so you better catch it quick. Because that ramp goes up really quick, and you're like, oh shit, don't die! Kill! Before it gets there, otherwise you're going to hard restart.
In 2016, is that what you're going for?
Sorry?
Linux on the desktop in 2016.
Yeah.
Just disable the swap, so it just keeps things in your
Well, that will just cause the problem much quicker. It'll just start thrashing like crazy. Anyway, yeah. So yeah, it's not something for my answer at home was this is as much memory as I can get in this laptop. For my workstation at home, I have 32 gigs in it, and probably going to get another 32 before too long as well, which will just increase the time between restarts of the environment for me. So, yeah.
How reasonable would it be to try to get this to work with a Jupyter notebook?
How cheap? How cheap?
Not very reasonable. What?
You said a cheaper notebook?
A Jupyter notebook.
Oh, a Jupyter. What is a Jupyter notebook?
Like an IPython notebook, like a
Oh!
editor in the browser.
Oh, funny you should ask that. I use now I understand which I thought there was some brand of notebook called Jupyter, and I'm like, oh, I haven't heard of that one. No, there is actually already, so the question is, how hard is it to get it to work with a Jupyter notebook? Oh, you're talking about Ensime, right, yeah. Specifically. I was going to say, because I've got the Jupyter notebook running, I use that for demos and training and stuff like that. I think I've pretty much abandoned the idea, because originally what got me into this conversation was the idea of running it in Activator. I think in hindsight, the environment is heavy enough that I'm not sure it would really work well in that environment. It really is like, putting an editor on top of it is sort of like having a seagull perched on top of a tanker. You see the seagull, but the tanker's the big thing that's actually doing all the work and moving. And it might be possible to run it and it'd be interesting to see where you could go with something like that. But I think probably, for example, running it with Activator, it's going to make Activator very big. It's going to make it a very big and heavy proposition for people to use. So I haven't really looked at that seriously as an option in a long time. Besides, I use Sublime, so that's my particular itch to scratch. But yeah, that would be interesting. I use Jupyter, Scala Jupyter quite a bit, and it would be lovely to see it if it did work. So, all right. Any other? Yes.
A quick question. This was a little while ago, it might be fixed now. But how does it handle if you have a lot of provided libraries in your build SBT? Will it resolve those and look those up and source config for those as well? Or does it have to be actually?
Yeah, so the question is, what if you have a lot of libraries in your build SBT? It works very well for that. It obviously will take a bit longer to download them the first time because it downloads all the sources and documentation for them. But it works fine, and if you run it on a project with loads of dependencies, the first time it builds up that class path, when it says saving class path, that will take a couple of minutes. It's quite a slow, that's much faster on iterations, when you run it again and again, unless you blow away your Ensime config and do it all over again, then you'll pay that 2-minute startup. It's about in line with what IntelliJ takes to do the same thing. If you open IntelliJ on something with loads of dependencies, you'll notice it takes quite a long time for that indexing bar to go along the bottom of the screen. It's basically the same thing.
Yeah,
So.
I was thinking specifically for provided libraries, so it's like, you have like the test scope and the runtime scope, and then there's a provided scope you can apply. So like we were working on a project that used Spark.
Okay.
And we didn't actually need those in the patch jar we were building, but we were still referencing code from the Spark libraries.
Okay. I don't know that I've tried that, so I would give it a go and see what it does. We tend not to work that way. I have done source dependencies in there, and they work fine. Basically, did you know about that SBT? You can stick a GitHub URL effectively into SBT, and it makes it a source dependency. So it just goes and grabs the latest source out of GitHub. I think Josh showed me that about 3 years ago, and I'm like, you can do that? And then I did it for a bunch of projects for a couple of months, and I'm like, this has some downsides. People keep breaking my shit. And so I stopped doing it after that. But it does work okay with that, so yeah.
Just to answer your question, I think it just calls the SBT update classifiers method, and I don't think that will download the provided ones. I don't know, I never tried it, but I don't know when you guys tried it.
It's probably a few months ago. I think there's been like a new major version
Okay.
since I've tried last.
And the other thing is use the Corsair plugin, what they recommend here. You get like a 5 to 10 times speed up.
Yeah, that has made a big difference. I noticed that on the Scala. So the Scala debugger is pretty heavy. It uses a lot of actually, I think it's mostly the code in there. But I've noticed that the resolving takes a long time with Ivy, and it's a lot faster with, what is it, Corsair? Corsair, yeah. It does speed things up a bit, but that's just the resolving. The other thing that really slows down resolving is when you use the Ivy. It's got some kind of like little DSL for saying I'll be able to use any version within this range, and it's like you use a square bracket at one side and a paren at the other or something, and it's some little DSL in there that says, oh, you can use like 1.3.1 all the way up to 1.9.7. When you use those, it becomes horribly slow to resolve dependencies. I don't know what the hell it's doing, but that really slows things down, and you can claw that back by just going in and making a little overrides file that just says, you know what, stop trying to figure out which version to use and just use this 1.9.1 version. Whenever I ask for this library, use 1.9.1. I've used that on multiple, I've been seen to be a miracle worker on projects because people are like, it's taking, a minute to resolve all of our dependencies. And I go in and I'm like, well, I can see these 3 things here, I'll fix those. Instantly back down to 2 seconds to resolve it. And you get to look really cool from that one trick. So, yeah, I don't know how Corsair does on that. I haven't messed with it enough. Maybe it does a better job of figuring out dynamic dependencies.
Some edge cases, sometimes it doesn't work. So I mean, it's basically just an SPT plugin, which changes the ID resolution to, I can't remember the name who wrote it, but it's really incredible.
It does make a huge difference in the speed, yeah. All right. So office hours, have we got time?
I think we have about half an hour, so the
Okay.
first at 9.
Okay.
So
I shall disconnect, or unless there's any other questions. So, again.